This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and this is episode 673 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by FanDuel. Thanks for tuning in. I don't really believe in the idea of not reacting to what happened in week one. It's not like we received irrelevant information, especially at running back. As I say on this show all the time, coaching decisions will often dictate how good a running back can be in fantasy football. We hope that talent wins out. We typically only have one running back on the field at once. And who's putting that running back on the field? The coaches. So if the coach likes a certain running back or wants a committee, that shifts the fantasy football equation. And week one can tell us at least a little bit about how coaches are viewing these backs. We also got a glimpse of other situations across the league too. So it's fine to react. It's just necessary to not overreact and think at the extremes for these players. Your preseason research still matters. Not everything comes down to a week one performance. And that's the theme to today's 15 transaction show. I'm reacting, but I'm trying my best to not overreact. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this each week is that I don't want to repeat myself too often on this show in order to give you as many transactions as possible. Like last week, I talked about Jahan Dotson, Kenyon Drake, Romeo Doubs, and Gerald Everett. I talked about them as ads. I mentioned David Montgomery as a sell while talking up Khalil Herbert. So I won't be bringing those situations up on today's show because there are other situations to get to. But those other transactions often still matter for the current week. My goal is to be 1 week ahead with this stuff. And I think that we're off to a pretty good start here in 2022. Now, before getting to the transactions, I wanted to send a reminder about FanDuel Face-Off. FanDuel Face-Off is where you can compete in quick, fun games against other real people for real cash. It has all sorts of games that you're familiar with, like a home run derby, Wheel of Fortune, puzzle and strategy games, and there's more on the way. Contests are action-packed and last between 2 to 5 minutes, so you can play on your couch, waiting in line, during a commercial break, wherever and on your schedule. Plus, you can practice for free anytime. Whether it be head-to-head, multiplayer, or larger tournaments, FanDuel Face-Off has something for you. Plus, in most contests, you'll be matched against other players of similar skill level, so you're never totally overmatched, even as a beginner. Face-Off is also tied to your FanDuel account and wallet, so you can easily use your daily fantasy funds or sportsbook winnings in the app. Visit FanDuel.com/faceoff or download the FanDuel Face-Off app in the Apple App Store today to get in the game. Age and location restrictions apply, void where prohibited. See FanDuel.com/faceoff-terms for terms and conditions. Buy Chase Edmonds. If you ignore actual production, Chase Edmonds actually had a really nice debut for the Dolphins. He wasn't like terrible in fantasy. He scored 10.5 PPR points, but it's not like he crushed it in your lineup. The good news is that output could create a nice buy low opportunity. Because on Sunday, Edmonds saw 66.7% of the team's running back rushes, and he had a 12.9% target share. Last season, on a per-game basis, just 5 running backs with 8 or more games played were able to average the market share stats that Edmonds hit in week 1. 4 of those running backs ended up top 10 in PPR points per game last year. The 5th one, he was top 15. We can't assume that Edmonds is going to maintain this pace, but this is all definitely a very good sign. Add Jeff Wilson. One of the hottest waiver wire ads this week, it's going to be Jeff Wilson. Elijah Mitchell suffered a knee injury that could sideline him for some time. Next in line for the 49ers offense, I guess, is Jeff Wilson? I guess? We know that Kyle Shanahan loves to switch things up at running back. So we could see some wild stuff happen in this backfield over these next handful of weeks. Not only will Deebo Samuel steal a lot of work, but the team could make Tyrion Davis-Price active on game days. They might give him the bulk of the early down work. Or maybe they end up letting the out-of-nowhere rookie Jordan Mason have that role. Because remember, Mason was active over Davis-Price on Sunday. But we're adding Wilson because it's the most logical thing to do. He saw every non-Deebo Samuel carry after Elijah Mitchell's injury on Sunday against the Bears. If you're in a deeper format, throwing a dart at Davis-Price or Mason, that's totally fine too. Mason might seem like the target over Davis-Price because he was the one who was active in week 1, but according to Kyle Shanahan, that had to do with special teams. So between those two, it's a genuine toss-up at this point until we hear a little bit more. So for now, prioritize Jeff Wilson in this backfield and have the other 2 options on speed dial. add Isaiah Pacheco. So for those of you who listened to the episode earlier in July on breakout running backs, you might remember that middle round breakout running backs, they generally break out if they're the RB1s by average draft position on their team, they're pass catchers, and they're younger players. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire really checked a lot of boxes entering the season. And he couldn't have gotten off to a much better start for fantasy purposes. He scored twice against the Cardinals in week 1. He had a top 10 performance at the running back position. But he didn't have great backfield share numbers. He handled just 30.4% of the team's running back rushes, and he had a 7.7% target share. But if you watch that game, you know that game script played at least some role in that. He saw the majority of his touches during the first half. So that blowout win against Arizona allowed Isaiah Pacheco to see a lot of work in his first NFL game. Pacheco's still out there in almost 70% of Yahoo leagues, and he looked really good as the closer for Kansas City. He ran the ball 12 times for 62 yards and a touchdown. And for what it's worth, and this was late in the game, but Pacheco was the only running back on the Chiefs who had a goal line rush. That's just a noteworthy statistic. Pacheco's a 7th round rookie, and he's already seeing this kind of work in the offense. I don't care when the work came. That's something that we should pay attention to. So at best, he starts to take more and more work in this offense. At worst, he's a handcuff to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who you might be able to throw in the flex spot every once in a while. Add Kyle Phillips. I don't think people understand how excited I am that 2 of the first transactions this week are add Isaiah Pacheco and add Kyle Phillips. They're 2 guys that I really like during draft time. But in week 1, it wasn't Drake London who led rookie wide receivers in target share. It wasn't Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson or Jahan Dotson or Treylon Burks. It was Treylon Burks' teammate, Kyle freaking Phillips. He saw 29% of Tennessee's targets on Sunday. He turned 9 targets into 6 catches for 66 yards, and he made a really clutch catch at the end of that game. You don't let a target share like that sit on your waiver wire, especially from a rookie wide receiver. I'm into Kyle Phillips, I'm excited about Kyle Phillips, and so are my dynasty teams. Hold Kadarius Toney. So Kadarius Toney is either not very good, in the doghouse, or injured. Because he ended week 1 with 0 targets and 2 rush attempts, and he played 7 snaps. I've already been asked multiple times if it's time to drop Kadarius Toney. And the answer to that, absolutely not. Not right now. If you listened to the show last week, you probably remember me talking about Toney as a player to buy. So right now, I'm taking an L. I'm taking a giant L. But the reason I said that was because news surrounding him was negative. His average draft position had been dropping. That was partially due to injury, but it created an interesting opportunity to trade for Toney, to buy him low. But I'll be honest, his week 1 performance doesn't give me much confidence. Of course it doesn't. He played 7 snaps. But if you were to drop him, you likely wouldn't be rostering a player who has as much upside as Kadarius Toney has. Toney had a really good yards per route run and targets per route run rate as a rookie last year. He's in very, very good company when it comes to some of the more predictive metrics in fantasy football and how rookies do moving forward in their career. That shouldn't just be wiped away because his coach decided to play Richie James and David Sills over him on Sunday. And I'm a big Richie James guy. So yeah, Toney's stock definitely took a hit. But you shouldn't drop him when there are a number of reasons as to why he barely saw the field in week 1. Evidence suggests, outside of this being a coaching decision, that talent is not one of those reasons. Evidence tells us that Kadarius Toney does have some talent. Buy Dalvin Cook. So it wasn't the best season debut for Dalvin Cook, but that's exactly why I'm talking about him today. He had 20 carries, he had 90 yards on the ground, he did a little bit through the air as well. But here's the good part. He handled 71.4% of the team's running back rushes, and most importantly, he had a 16.1% target share. Now that translated to just 5 targets through the air. But the Vikings were leading for the majority of that game against Green Bay. In a more neutral game script, in a negative game script, expect the Vikings to throw a lot more. And that would lead to a lot more love for Dalvin Cook. And if and when some of those passing touchdowns turn into rushing touchdowns, that's also going to benefit Cook. So I think that Cook should be considered still an elite running back in fantasy football. That's why I'm giving him a shout. Add Robbie Anderson. So 2 years ago, Robbie Anderson first debuted for the Panthers. He averaged a target share per game rate that year of 26%. That was higher per game than what DJ Moore saw, when DJ Moore was a 3rd-year wide receiver. And then last year, we had a new quarterback situation. Things shifted. But on Sunday, Anderson out-targeted Moore 8-6. He finished the week with a 32% target share. And keep in mind, this is now happening with another new quarterback. Now, to be clear, I'm not sitting here saying that Anderson is the better player to roster compared to DJ Moore. In fact, I think DJ Moore is a buy low candidate. So there's an extra transaction for you. This is just more to say that with fantasy football, we have to sometimes expect the unexpected. Especially when we've actually seen it before. We've seen Robbie Anderson on this team see a high target share. I mean, if we sat here and we had to place a bet on which Panthers wide receiver was going to be the most fantasy relevant this year, we would absolutely 100 times out of 100 say DJ Moore. But DJ Moore's not free. Robbie Anderson, he's available in 89% of Yahoo leagues. Why not add him and see if this is somewhat sustainable? Drop Mike Gesicki. So again, I don't want to overreact to what happened in week 1, but when it really lines up to what we thought entering the season, I do think that we should react fairly strongly. And that's what's going on with Mike Gesicki. There was plenty of talk about Gesicki being less involved in this Dolphins offense this season, and then on Sunday, he saw 1 target to tight end teammate Durham Smythe's 2, and he ran just 3 more routes according to PFF. Gesicki's best out right now from a fantasy standpoint is a trade, straight up. That's not something that you can bank on, though, in season-long fantasy football. So it's time to drop Gesicki and embrace the stream. Add Donovan Peoples-Jones. So through Sunday's games, there were 6 wide receivers who had a 35% target share or better. One of them was Justin Jefferson. That's not a surprise. Another one was Cooper Kupp. That's also not a surprise. And then the next 3 were the studs who switched teams during the offseason. A.J. Brown, Devontae Adams, and Tyreek Hill. Also not that much of a surprise. The last one, though, Donovan Peoples-Jones. He saw 11 targets and he had a 36.2% target share for Cleveland on Sunday. He had 6 catches for 60 yards. Now, it may be tough to start a pass catcher on the Browns week in and week out, but Deshaun Watson will eventually be back. So what if Peoples-Jones can carve out a decent role in this offense until that point? Maybe he can be thrown in your flex at times. And then when Deshaun Watson is back, DPJ gets a nice big boost. And that's during the most important weeks of your fantasy football season. So the potential is there. I would be adding DPJ this week. Buy Drake London. The Falcons' offense actually looked competent in week 1, and that's a great sign for their pass catchers. Drake London, in his first NFL action, he had 5 catches for 74 yards against Pro Football Focus's 7th-ranked secondary entering the season. He tied Kyle Pitts for the team lead in target share at 21.9%. Now, as I mentioned on this podcast during the offseason, rookie wide receivers who get drafted in the top 100 overall in redraft leagues, they tend to do very, very well in fantasy. They exceed expectation at a higher rate than alternatives in that area of the draft. And rookies also tend to perform better during the second half of the season. So things could just be getting started for Drake London, who, by the way, had a 98th percentile prospect score in my prospect model. Add Jaylen Warren. So Najee Harris was injured in week 1 against Cincinnati. And it sounds like that injury is related to the Liz Frank injury that he suffered and dealt with in camp. It evidently isn't major, but it's best to just snag Jaylen Warren this week just in case. He was the only other running back for Pittsburgh to register a snap on Sunday. Here's the thing, though. I think that your league mates probably would want Jaylen Warren more than I would. There's a very real chance that he's going to be the bell cow back for the Steelers. That's as long as Najee Harris misses some time. So yeah, you should absolutely add him. But the situation in Pittsburgh is not great. It's why I had Najee Harris as a sell just last week. So Warren should be added because volume matters in fantasy football. But the Steelers' offensive line in week 1, it looked just as bad as what it looked like in 2021. And the quarterback situation does not look great either. I'm not very bullish on the Steelers' offense right now, so I can't be bullish on their backup running back. With that being said, he should still absolutely be added this week because he could see a big workload. Add Curtis Samuel. So this transaction is actually pretty simple. Curtis Samuel's usage in week 1, spectacular. He led the Commanders with 11 targets, he had a 26.8% target share, and he ran the ball 4 times. Even if he doesn't maintain that from here on out, it's at least worth a shot to see if he can do something moving forward. I think he's a really good add this week. Sell Cordero Patterson. So I've had a weird relationship with Cordarrelle Patterson and how I've analyzed him this offseason, because it started with me thinking that I was low on him. And then I found out when drafts kind of started that I was actually one spot higher than consensus with him in the running back rankings. So he ended up finding some of my teams. And so week 1, I was all about it. He crushed it in week 1. His 84.6% running back rush share against the Saints was actually higher than any share that he'd seen during the 2021 season. So you're probably wondering, why am I sitting here talking to you saying to sell Cordarrelle Patterson? Well, here's the thing. According to PFF, Damian Williams played 7 of Atlanta's first 10 offensive snaps before getting injured on Sunday. Avery Williams was the only other running back who was active on Sunday for the Falcons. So after Damian Williams was hurt, it was Cordarrelle Patterson and Avery Williams. And Williams was active because of special teams. So Patterson ended up handling 22 rush attempts. That was 6 more than any other game in his career. So we'll see how much time Damian Williams misses. At the time of this recording, I don't know exactly how long he's going to be sidelined, if at all. But rookie Tyler Algier, who was a scratch on Sunday, he'll probably be active if Williams is out. And I think that Tyler Algier would be the one to give Cordarrelle Patterson some relief. AKA, this backfield might be more split up than what we saw in week 1. So that's the idea behind selling Cordarrelle Patterson right now. You'd be selling him high. And I know that there are people out there who absolutely love Patterson, and for good reason. He's a really, really fun player. I'm just trying to look at this objectively. It's not a bad idea to see if you can sell high. And it's also not a bad idea to snag Damian Williams or Tyler Algier if they're out there. That all depends on the reports surrounding this Williams injury. Add Rex Burkhead and hold Dameon Pierce. My fear for Dameon Pierce entering the season, and I talked about this a lot on the podcast, was that he'd lose receiving work to Rex Burkhead. Even if we think that Pierce is the better talent, if the Texans themselves wanted to throw Burkhead onto the field, then that would limit Pierce's upside. And we saw that in week 1, but we saw that and more. Not only did Burkhead run 25 routes to Pierce's 5, but he also out-attempted Pierce 14 to 11. Burkhead absolutely needs to be added this week. Seeing more than half of his team's running back rushes while eating up a 22.2% target share, that's awesome usage for a running back. I don't care what team you're on. But the reason that Pierce is a hold is because as the season goes on, we could just naturally see some of that Burkhead work go to the rookie. For now, though, given what we saw in week 1, Burkhead is the player that you want to start from this backfield. Add Josh Palmer. So Keenan Allen suffered a hamstring injury against the Raiders in week 1, and the Chargers ended up having essentially a committee at wide receiver after that injury, or at least that's what the target totals showed. But if you look at the snaps and routes run data, it painted a little bit different of a story. Mike Williams led the team with 31 routes run, Josh Palmer was second at 25, and then DeAndre Carter, the team's number 4 option with a healthy Keenan Allen, he was at 14. And Palmer also played twice as many snaps as Carter did. So even though everyone in that offense essentially finished with 4 targets on Sunday, Mike Williams and Josh Palmer are looking like the starters with Keenan Allen banged up. And since Mike Williams isn't sitting out there in 79% of Yahoo leagues like Josh Palmer is the one that you got to add. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you've yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. Remember to check out LateRound.com and join the Late Round Fantasy Football Patreon. I have weekly rankings for you, rest of season rankings, a great Discord channel, Q&A live streams, and more. So definitely check it out. Go to LateRound.com. Thanks for listening, everyone. Really appreciate it. I'll talk to you tomorrow with the 10 Trends episode.